Hello and welcome to Amplify, the CMC podcast, focusing on artists active in new music from Ireland. I'm Evonne Ferguson and this is episode 119. Thanks for joining us. A little reminder that all the details on music featured in this episode are in the show notes on cmc.ie/amplify, where you'll also be able to access past episodes of Amplify, and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes. For this episode of Amplify, we take a sort of trip down musical memory lane with Conductor Paul Hillier, recorded last October on the weekend that he stepped down as Artistic Director of Chamber Choir Ireland, a position he held for 16 years. Throughout that time, the choir under his direction continued their tradition of commissioning new works from composers from home and abroad. And so, as he was preparing for his final concerts with Chamber Choir Ireland as Artistic Director, we asked him for some afternoon tea and a chat in the CMC podcast studio to celebrate a selection of the works by composers from Ireland commissioned and performed by Chamber Choir Ireland in recent years. I began by asking Paul Hillier about working with composer David Fennessy. Chamber Choir Ireland has had a very special relationship with David Fennessy, and I know he was a sort of amateur tenor in his day. And there's a triptych of 3 pieces, Letter to Michael, Remember Not, and Hashima Refrain. This triptych has been over a number of years, this relationship with David Fennessy. Where did you first come across David's work?
Here.
Okay.
In this house. Well, I wasn't sure if it's this room or not.
Yes.
But I was looking through a whole pile of, a huge pile, you probably remember this, of contemporary Irish choral music. And I had no idea what I was going to find. But one of the pieces that jumped up right at me was Choirland. Yes. And I looked at this and I thought, this is fantastic. Who is this guy? Never heard of him. And so we did that piece. And I guess he must have come along for one of the performances we did. And so we talked, and he was interested in my idea of, the first case of just having a piece done for us. And it was at the result of that, then we also thought it would be interesting to turn that into a triptych. But that was, for me, one of the most delightful discoveries on that day.
The 3 pieces in the triptych are incredibly different then from Choirland. Yeah. I suppose that's also that Dave has matured as a composer as well. I mean, Choirland is quite an early piece, I suppose, if we think of his body of work now. It sort of struck me listening back actually to the pieces in the triptych today, how different they are from Choirland, because I have a big fondness for Choirland myself too. And Letter to Michael has this... I suppose what really struck me is this is the kind of intensity and denseness of sections, and then the kind of sparseness of other sections. That's particularly striking, I think.
But I mean, yeah, definitely. There's no way that, as you say, the choir, the original piece is from a different era in his work. But the thing about a composer is once they've done something that really works, you then have confidence that whatever else they'll do will probably work equally well. You have no idea what they're going to do, and I certainly didn't. But I wasn't at all surprised when he showed me what he'd written for us. Mm-hmm. I was delighted, and I could see little things perhaps connecting it to that first piece. But yes, you're quite right. They not only are they different from Choirland, all three of these pieces in the triptych have their own world, and yet one can make contacts between those worlds.
Of course, Paul, when people are given a commission for choral music, they're presented with the additional challenge of selecting an appropriate text. Yeah. Dave's texts are quite minimal. They're short and they're repeated and they're intense. Then, of course, there are other works that have been commissioned by Chamber Choir Ireland that have quite a substantial amount of text. Let's talk a little bit about the work by Siobhán Cleary, which again is quite early on in your tenure as artistic director, from 2010. Theophilus Thistle and the Myth of Miss Moffat. It's a wonderfully entertaining, exciting, engaging work of different tongue twisters.
Yes.
And it's a particular favourite of yours, I think.
Oh, yeah. It's an unusual... I mean, I think it's one of a kind, because it's not only about these strange word games, but it's also a journey across Europe by visiting different places where she had come across a particular word game that she liked. And I think it was brilliant. The idea was brilliant, and the execution of the idea, likewise. And it gave us a pleasure to do. And I think it also gave the audience a pleasure too. So, I mean, that it was a win-win situation, really.
I suppose just back to the kind of the rhythmic drive that's in Siobhán Cleary's work, you can also kind of hear that in Andrew Hamilton's work as well. Yeah. And other early recording that you made with Chamber Choir Ireland early in your tenure, Everything is Ridiculous.
It's certainly a stunning piece of writing. It's also extremely difficult to perform. The choir actually did a very great job on that.
quite a seminal commission for Chamber Choir Ireland by a very well-known and highly established Irish composer. And yes, Gerald Barry. And, there's this beautiful recording that Chamber Choir Ireland and Crash Ensemble made. Barry Meets Beethoven, a portrait CD of Gerald Barry's music, and few pieces by Chamber Choir Ireland. The Shot and Sons Manse. It's another one of these pieces with a lot of text and big narrative, and Stephen Richardson joining the choir as well. He's written a lot of vocal music, choral, and then the big operatic.
I think the reason why it's so good is that you wouldn't think, in fact, that he was going to be a good choral writer, because he gives the impression of being, to me, a master of instrumental writing, and he treats the choir in the same way, or the voices, yes, or even the solo voice in the same way, and they just have to get on with it. And it proves that actually you can do almost anything with voices.
Of a pianoforte arrangement which I have been invited to make. This has not been and will not be undertaken. Arrangement was discussed, but only until I was quite sure of you. The fact is that somebody in Vienna, whom you would hardly guess, but who is also a publisher, advised me not to have any dealings with you. I see that there are people here who are very anxious to disturb my cordial understanding with you, possibly on both sides.
So I think that the pieces he wrote for us are absolutely brilliant. And one-offs. I mean, that's that kind of piece, and this one over here is another kind.
And there's also long time, of course.
Oh yeah, it's a single line of music, which is stretched all the way through the choir. So the range of the vocal part, you could call it a single vocal part, because I don't think there's any real harmony at all. But anyway. It stretches through rather a wide range of these singers, and yet it's one musical progress that goes on all the way through. Brilliant idea.
Yeah, brilliant idea.
Who else would write a piece like that? Who would dare? Because it's extraordinarily hard.
For a long time I used to go to bed. Sometimes when I had put out my candle, it was so quickly that I had no even time to say I'm going to sleep. And half an hour later, the thought that it was sleep would awaken me.
I would try to put away the book which I imagined was still in my hands and to blow out the light. I had been thinking all the time while I was asleep of what I had just been reading. But my thoughts had run into a channel of their own, until I myself seemed actually to have become the subject of my book.
A child of rivalry between Francois I and Charles V. This impression would persist for some moments after I was awake. It did not disturb my mind when
You're listening to Amplify, the CMC podcast, focusing on artists active in new music from Ireland. And for this episode, we're in conversation with conductor Paul Hillier, recorded in October 2024, as he was about to step down as Artistic Director of Chamber Choir Ireland. Paul, yeah, this is a bit of a trip down memory lane, I suppose, and a reflection. And another work from quite early on, the White Noisery from Jennifer Walshe. Very, very particular, very Jenny Walshe, quintessentially Jenny Walshe, I would say, with the, I think, tracks in the earpiece and for different singers and snippets of pop tunes and all those wonderful, quirky Jenny Walshe things.
I mean, it's the kind of piece I would have wanted from an Irish composer, or any composer actually, but definitely an Irish composer. And I mean, I didn't know a lot of her stuff, but I knew enough to know that it was a kind of sort of private universe that I would like to get something out of. And when it came along, it was perfect. I mean, it was exactly the kind of thing. And yet I obviously only looking at it again, do I really recognize and get to know what she has done for us.
There can be no more texting until 4 o'clock in the morning. There can be no more complaining about your skin condition. There can be no more typing who made Barry into Google. There can be no more searching his garage for bottles. There can be no more reconvening of the UN High Commission. There can be no more endpoints available from the endpoint. There can be no more researching Drew's tattoos on Wikipedia. There can be no more surprises in the tree and To Kill a Mockingbird. There can be no more writing One Direction fanfic. There can be no more lying about the purpose of your trip. There can be no more space for the virtual disc error message. There can be no more emergency visits to cardiologists. There can be no more looking at pictures of Ethan on Facebook. There can be no more ethical treatment of the elephant. There can be no more reassuring her he will really make it. There can be no more ordering discontinued makeup. There can be no more file errors in Windows 7. There can be no more real facial expressions on Jersey Shore. There can be no more white horses or pretty ladies of my door.
It's interesting, actually. People have come in and looked at that score in the library. Conductors,
and they
choral
don't.
conductors, and they've thought it was the most intriguing piece, but they haven't just grasped the nettle to perform it.
They probably feel that they don't have. I mean, you might think that you have to have professional singers to do such a piece, and yes, that's probably true to do it easily. But I think that they should have a go. You know, I really do. I don't know what Jennifer feels about the piece and whether she would kind of create a slightly simpler version, perhaps. That could be something. I don't know. But I don't think it was that difficult. It required a bit of work and patience, but I wouldn't describe that as one of the most difficult pieces.
Well, skipping in the musical TARDIS, for want of a better word, and moving from 2010 right up to one of the most recent commissions, which is Stephen McNeff's Divas and Lazarus. And I had the great pleasure, I mean this, a great honour of sitting in on the rehearsal of that work with yourself and the choir and Stephen being there. And you know, when I read the programme note, when I saw what the text was, and this very clear title on the score, that it is a parable for unaccompanied voices, is quite unique in 2023, in this time, to write a work that is a moral tale.
Yeah.
Did you speak with Stephen about the text that he was going to choose? Did you have this is the second commission from Chamber Choir to Stephen, so there is a relationship there, as we've spoken about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you have a chat about this?
I think he had a chat with me. In other words, he had the idea and he told me what it was, and I said, "Oh, that sounds interesting." I wasn't quite sure because I didn't know how he was going to treat the whole Melville situation, and my uncertainty continued until we started rehearsing, and even then I wasn't immediately sure. Okay, this is going to be interesting. once we started doing it, I came to like it more and more. The two pieces that he has written for the choir are very different from each other. And I rather assumed that they were going to be similar, and I was wrong. And the earlier piece, I think it's beautiful, a very strong piece. And actually, I wish we had done it again more recently. It wasn't straight. It wasn't easy. It was a sort of a harder piece than a lot. But perfectly doable, and so that's the universe I thought was his, was this kind of writing, and the Dives and Lazarus. And again, I was a little bit mystified because I don't think he had mentioned Melville at first. It was just the Dives and Lazarus story, which of course is essentially a biblical. I thought, well, okay. Learning it, I began to see that it had fantastic things in it. And I now think it's an extraordinarily wonderful piece with elements of musicals in it somehow in the writing, which is delightful and fun for the singers as well. And yet it holds its focus very strongly about what it's actually about and how it does it. So I think it's a great piece.
Chamber Choir Ireland has performed quite a number of works from Rhona Clarke as well, and I know you and Rhona have also worked closely on the Sean O'Riordan competition too, and a number of works of Rhona's across the years, and there's a very positive relationship there as well between the choir and Rhona.
Yeah, but this particular piece, if I'm right, was originally written for the Latvian choir.
Yes.
And I thought that was a very good move for her. I don't know how it came about, but it was a very good idea because that choir, which is a very fine choir, when you know her music and this particular piece, you can see that it was written for them and suited them, I'm sure, right down to the ground. And at the same time, it's another of a contemporary piece which has a very tonal basis, and more of those are being written. And you would imagine that maybe some composers are not interested in that kind of thing, or feel that it has to sound modern to be good. And of course, I don't think that's true necessarily. I think the piece is very beautifully written, and I felt that I knew it because when she was writing for the Latvians, somehow she was writing in a style that they knew as well. I'm not saying that she deliberately wrote in a Latvian manner. That would be silly, but I felt it was very natural to her. That's the impression I got. And as I've done quite a lot of Baltic music, not just Pärt and the Estonians, but also the Latvians and Lithuanians. I did a lot of that music when I was working in Estonia with the choir there. So I felt, yes, I see where this fits. And at the same time, I know that I like that kind of stuff. So we did it as well.
Paul Hillier, outgoing Artistic Director of Chamber Choir Ireland, I want to sincerely thank you for your time and for your incredible musical insights and generosity for coming on CMC's podcast Amplify this afternoon. It's been an absolute pleasure over the last 16 years to attend Chamber Choir Ireland's concerts, curated so beautifully by your good self. We wish you all the best on your retirement, Paul, and again, thanks so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
The Pie Jesu from Rhona Clarke's Requiem from 2020. Chamber Choir Ireland, Paul Hillier conducting. Sincere thanks again to Paul Hillier for his time and his thoughts on what was for him a very busy weekend of rehearsals and concerts. Thanks also to Magella Hollywood, CEO of Chamber Choir Ireland, for her support with the recordings of the choir that are featured throughout this episode. And Chamber Choir Ireland will present a feast of contemporary choral music at New Music Dublin Festival at the beginning of April with their programme Refracting Light on Saturday the 5th of April. And then they will join the RTE Concert Orchestra on the final evening of the festival, Sunday the 6th of April, for Irene Buckley's opera The Lament for Art O'Leary. Full details on chamberchoirireland.com. And all the details on music featured in this episode are in the show notes on cmc.ie/amplify, where you'll also be able to access past episodes of the podcast. And don't forget, please subscribe for future episodes. Thanks for joining us on CMC's Amplify.